Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, dear participants, a warm welcome to all and each of you watching this webinar from India, Mexico, Paris, and across the globe. Welcome to the second Mexico and India Dialogues on Women's Rights, a series of dialogues conceived to exchange ideas and knowledge and in issues related to gender equality and women's rights. Today's session, we'll discuss how women are breaking gender stereotypes in the media. My name is Angela Melo. I will be your moderator for today. I'm speaking from Paris headquarters at UNESCO, where I am a director for programs and policies within the social and human science sector. You are very welcome. Women in the media are placed at a unique position to stand up for women whose voices are suppressed. They are role models for some and advocates for many women. It is my honor to hosting this exchange today to listen to the stories of our two very distinguished and prominent panelists to learn from their vast experiences. As a collaboration between UNESCO Office New Delhi and Embassy of Mexico in India, this part of series of dialogues on women's rights and gender equality that seek to stir up a conversation, exchanges knowledge, and maybe some lessons learned, probably, between Mexico and India, but all beyond. The first dialogue of this initiative began some weeks ago by presenting a striking documentary called Intimate Battles, which was followed by a stimulating dialogue between the director, the committed activists and professionals from India and Mexico. I'd like to kickstart today's session with a short video which summarizes the first edition of these dialogues on gender equality and women's rights for us to set the tone for this dialogue. Please, video.
This year, Mexico and India are celebrating 70 years of diplomatic relations. And one of the things that we're trying to do here at the Embassy of Mexico is also to open new avenues of understanding and to imagine common solutions for shared problems.
And the case of women is it's a case point, because if we talk about poverty, if we talk about vulnerability, if we talk about any kind of gap, a salary gap or labor participation gap or representation in higher levels of decision, women are always lagging behind. Women represent 70% of the workforce in the health sectors, but they are usually the lower paid jobs and those that are more exposed to the virus.
Feminism must be a matter that concerns all of us, women and men equally. And the first step is to recognize that this is a real situation. The implications of the pandemic on women's well-being are multifaceted.
The dynamics of power can play out anywhere, and I don't think it's country-specific at all as to where power will play out. It's just that in patriarchal cultures like India and Mexico, it's even more, and we almost teach our sons that if you don't get power, snatch it, take it. And sadly, in countries like India, men have to constantly prove their masculinity or prove that they're manly enough. And sometimes that's at the cost of women. A lot of times we prove our masculinity at the cost of women.
I think that education can be the change, can make the change. I think that we work a lot in shelters and in how to put the band-aid, when you have you're hurt. But I think that's very important. But I think that politics and education, they can change this.
The fact is that we need to build up the incentives in our economies, in our societies, in our systems so that these very unfortunate incidents, violence, is really eradicated from the way we organize our.
We aspire with this type of dialogue, with this type of communication, to find new avenues for gender equality, because we are quite convinced that without it, there is no progress, societies do not change, and violence will not decrease, and inequality will prevail unless we do something about it.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Moving on, I'm pleased to introduce today's remarkable speakers who are leaders in their own right. They have both been defying the odds, and through their work, altering an image of women that is uplifting and empowering. First up is Angélica Aragón. Angélica Aragón is one of the most recognized actresses and theater producers in Mexico. She has taken part in more than 100 feature films, over 50 theatrical productions, and dozens of televisions and radio series in a variety of countries. Angélica became a beloved soap opera queen in the 90s, working extensively for two major Mexican networks. As a social activist, she strives for gender equality, respect for human rights, ethnic groups' rights, protection of the planet Earth, its ecosystems, and endangered life forms. Angélica studied in Britain at LAMDA, London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, and SOAS, University of London, where she took up Indian studies, Sanskrit, Bengali, and philosophy. She studied also Mohiniyattam and Kathakali under Tara Rajakumar in London, founder of the National Academy of India Dance, and with Kerala Kalamandan dance troupe in southern India. Angélica, thank you for having you with us today. It's really a pleasure to have you with us and sharing experience with us.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angélica. Really appreciate your presence here.
Yes, yes.
I have a question for you. Your repertoire as an actress speaks clearly of your politics, but none more so than the groundbreaking telenovela, A Woman's Glance, which came out in 1997 and was revolutionary for the times. How did you approach the representation of female protagonists in her 15s, Angélica?
Thank you very much. Well, my character was very close to my own self. We were contemporaries, more or less the same age group. I was maybe 44, 45. She turned 50 in episode 1 and found out that she was soon to be abandoned by her husband of 27 years because he was moving in with a much younger woman that was already pregnant. So this was a very traditional premise for our melodrama series called telenovelas or soap operas. And the definition of melodrama, I think, can be summarized as a sentimental issue that revolves around a feminine character, a woman. In this case, a middle-aged woman, a woman who suddenly has a door open for all her life options. She can decide for herself what she wants the second half of her life to be. And this was what was revolutionary. She chose to restart a life, to find another love interest, to find an economic independence. And this was very unusual at the time. We are a very macho-centered culture to this day. Back in 1997, Time magazine published this issue on June 2nd, which talked about the breaking of social structures in our society, not just through fiction and these soap operas, but we were undergoing a political change. Our democracy was opening. Suddenly there was a wide variety of choices, politically speaking, and society was, I think, ending the 20th century, beginning the 21st century, trying to establish a more equal status between men and women. Traditionally, our society has, the world over, has been established on hierarchical differences. The weak are subdued by the strong, women by men, men subdue other men. The conquering is a very male dominated attitude or behavior. As a Mexican society, we have been determined by a very, very violent conquest from the Europeans 500 years ago. And it has reinforced the already unequal structures of our pre-Hispanic or indigenous society, where women are subservient and have a second role always in relation to men. As I speak to you now, we are in the year 2020. For the last couple of months, every office of human rights in Mexico, throughout the whole country, is being occupied by women protests. Protests against gender violence, but also against physical violence, protests against a position of our present government, which is very deaf to our issues. Resources have been slashed for women's issues. The National Institute of Women has now half of the budget that it had in the past. So it is a worrisome situation, and women are now openly manifesting their voices in the street. For the last 30 years, I took part in what was probably the most successful show for one of these very important commercial networks in Mexico. And the title is, and has been, What We as Women Choose to Silence. For 25 years or more, 30 years, every man, technician, engineer, actor, who has worked for this project, for this production, has been unable to say the title. So they delegated to us. It is what they choose not to talk about, not what we as women choose not to talk about, which is a title under quotation marks. They changed the title so as to not have to say in first person plural a feminine way of speaking. So it is very, very difficult to integrate ourselves even in dialogue, because there is a strong resistance in our male population to be sensitive to these issues, even to this day, much more so 25 years ago.
Oh, Angélica, thank you very much for your wonderful experience and sharing with us. I can confirm that what I said at the very beginning, your CV, it's correct. You are courageous. you work on gender equality and a respect for human rights. Really, I appreciate that.
Thank
you
you
very much. We will have been the questions and answer sessions at the end of your interventions. The viewers or participants who would like to raise questions, they can drop them in the chat box. I now will move to Nandita Das. Nandita Das has acted in more than 40 feature films in 10 different languages. Her directorial debut in 2008 was Firak. I don't know if I pronounce well, Firak. She has been twice on the jury of the Cannes Film Festival, among other jury responsibilities. She holds a master's degree in social work and is a strong advocate for social justice and human rights, together as the same field of Angélica also works for human rights and gender equality. So we have a similar women, powerful women in terms of influencing our audience. This is why we select you to be here with us. She was conferred the Knight of Order of Arts in Letters by the French government. Nandita was the chairperson of the Children's Film Society and wrote a monthly column for 8 years in the Indian magazine, The Week, Manto. Nandita's second directorial film premiered in 2018 at the Cannes Film Festival and can be watched on the Netflix. Her first book, Manto and I, chronicles her 6-year-long journey of making the film. With support of UNESCO, she recently wrote, directed, produced, and acted in a short film called Listen to Her, that sheds light on the increase in domestic violence and overburden of the work that women have been facing during the national lockdown in India. Nandita Das is also an international jury member of UNESCO's Mandarjit Singh Prize for the promotion of tolerance and non-violence. We are very pleased, Nandita, to count on your experience and also to have a close partner like you, of course, like Angélica as well. Nandita, I have a question to you. There is a wide misconception that a female-centric film is a feminist film. Should films centered around a female protagonist have an ethical responsibility to define sexism and the male gaze? At the same time, do you think female artists face a disproportionate pressure to champion social and political issues, be social or politically correct in their works, whereas no such expectation exists for mainstream media? Back to you, Nandita.
Yes.
Please.
Well, you've asked in a way 2 questions together. So I'll answer the first one first, which is, and I've often wondered about it, that just having the woman as the protagonist to make a women-centric film, does it automatically mean that it's a feminist film or that it has a female gaze? I don't think so. In fact, in India also I've seen films and elsewhere where the woman is the protagonist, but the gaze is very male. So it kind of defeats the purpose. And there was a very famous film in India. Some of my Indian friends who are maybe on the panel might know. And it was about an actress who had done, in fact, I think just yesterday was her birth anniversary or something, they were talking about it, that she had to do all kinds of sort of sexual scenes, and she was seen in very bad light. She was, in a way, people enjoyed those films, but they never gave her the respect that maybe, that she deserved. And at the end of it, she was so tired of all of that sexism and the way people treated her that she committed suicide. So it was a very tragic story. I think it happened in the early 90s. And there was a film made about that, and with a very good actor. But the thing was, the way it was shot, the way the story unfolded, it was completely with a male gaze. Everything that they were trying to say against, they were doing that in the film. When I did Manto, and the protagonist was this writer of the 40s, he was a very sort of ahead of his times writer who wrote about things in a very honest way. He wrote about the people on the margins of society, especially about women and sex workers, because nobody was writing about them. And he was tried for obscenity 6 times because of the same stories that we celebrate today. So he was in the 40s. And because the man, it was a male protagonist, a lot of people, even my feminist friends, came up to me and said, "Why didn't you make a film about a woman? Why are you making it about a man?" Even though he was a feminist writer, and not just feminist through his work, but in his real life too. He deeply cared about his wife. He had 3 daughters. He was very close to his mother. He used to always give his stories to his sister. He was surrounded by women. And it was very rare for a South Asian man to be cooking, to be ironing his wife's sari, and to be making her hair when she was unwell, to be feeding children. Even most of the men today don't do that in our society. So he was really feminist in so many ways. Yet the expectation of a female oriented film is bigger than what the film is actually trying to say. So I think we often label things, we often have binaries of, if it's a woman centric, then it's a feminist film. But I feel how women are represented in films or television for that matter, that is more important. It could be a small or a big part. I don't think that makes the difference. The main thing is, how do you represent them? And representing them right doesn't mean always showing them, very powerful or strong. To just show them layered, like men's characters are. They can be vulnerable, they can be strong, they have their ups and downs. Just giving them more diversity, the kind of diversity that exists in society. So that's always a struggle. Also, at least in our country, I would be curious to know how it's in Mexico. But if there is a woman oriented film, then it's always more difficult to raise funds. Also, no big male star will act opposite you. So if you take a A-list female star, and if she's the protagonist, then the male counterpart will always be someone smaller. Whereas if you are a big male star, you will get any A-list star to play opposite you. So of course there is a lot of sexism that also exists in the field itself. So that's to answer your first question. Could you please repeat what was the second part? I think it was something slightly different.
The second part is, at the same time, do you think that female artists face a disproportionate pressure to champion social and political issues, be social and political correct?
Women, you mean women filmmakers, you're asking, right?
Exactly.
Like, do women, yeah.
Yes.
So yes, there is definitely a stereotyping of what women make. They make, because they are so emotional, they have their periods, they don't understand finance. These are all sort of preconceived notions. And anyway, the industry is mostly ruled by men. Like Ms. Aragón said also, that mostly it's a male dominated industry. So India is no different. So therefore definitely there is a stereotype about that. But in India, there have been more recently, in the last 10, 15, maybe maximum 20 years, there are few directors who have made very mainstream films that could have been made by any man. So that is, the perception is changing a little bit. There's a young filmmaker called Zoya Akhtar. She's very popular. She makes good films, and they're very mainstream as well. So that notion is shifting a little bit. But largely, there is an expectation that women will make a certain kind of film, which are going to be, you know, a bit soft and drama, in the genre of drama, that they can't do action, they can't do thriller, you know, they can't do horror. So these genres. Also, I think there's nothing completely wrong about wanting to do drama. For instance, I want to do drama. I enjoy stories about relationships. I enjoy stories that talk about, you know, the human situation, and about a social conscience in a film. So is it because I'm a woman? I mean, I don't want to shy away also from the fact that I am a woman, and if I'm a woman director, you know, that's one of many. I remember in early on when I did Firak in 2008, I used to be called on panels, on women director panels, and I used to really dislike it. And I used to say, I'm a filmmaker. When I'm on set, you know, I'm not saying I'm a woman filmmaker. I'm just a filmmaker, and I'm a director, and I'm directing my actors. So why do you want to call me a woman director? But over the years, I'm much more at peace with that label, because I feel that if we want more women directors, if we want more diversity, first we have to acknowledge that yes, I'm a woman director. You know, there are so few women filmmakers, and when you have less of us, there are less stories about us. There is, the female gaze is not there, the diversity is less. So to be able to have that, first we have to say, yes, I'm a woman director and I want more of us. So so I mean, it's a bit nuanced now, because usually people just say, why do you want to be labeled as a woman director? So I think there is a feminine side, there is something called a female gaze, and we should embrace it sort of more happily than worry about the fact that people are expecting a certain kind of cinema from us.
Oh, thank you so much, Nandita. It's I appreciate also, and I'd like to ask you. You said that the industry's movies in India is also changing. There is a mainstreaming roles in media. Why this situation happened? Because there's a changes in societies, or people also are getting a sort of consciousness in changing realities and narratives.
Sorry, I didn't fully understand
So
it. Could you?
my question is, you said that it's true that the industry's movies are changing in terms of
The films
having
are changing. More
yes,
women? You mean like more women are now coming into the film
exactly.
industry?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. It's
Of
good to
course. I
hear
mean,
from you.
yeah, I'm
Yes.
sure it's happening everywhere in the world, that slowly more and more women are coming in the film industry. If you see in film colleges, film courses, there are more women who
Okay.
are, you know, there are more women students coming in. So the younger generation is definitely, you know, taking up, participating behind the camera as well, not just as female actors, but there are cinematographers, there are editors, there are sound designers, there are music composers. So it is changing, but because this is still a recent phenomena, for them to be really playing significant roles, like being heads of their departments, I think that's going to still take time. So maybe in another 5, 6 years or 10 years, we will see a lot more women than you see now. You see them more as younger, you know, crew and younger people who are assistants to the main filmmakers or producers. So you don't see as many. So I think that is going to change, and because there are lots of young women who are wanting to tell their stories and are creating a kind of a collective to also help each other. Like there is a collective of cinematographers, just women cinematographers,
Okay.
you know, so there's a collective where women filmmakers are coming together. So it's still a long way, but I think there is definitely a change. And like you rightly said, when the change happens in society, it also reflects in various aspects. And, you know, the film industry is only a reflection of society. So yeah, it is changing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a truly enlightening conversation. We have now questions for both the panelists. I will go straight forward, both of you. I'd like to have to offer you the opportunity to react to each other presentations. You are free to react. And this is also in order to have interactive discussions. But I have also a question to Angélica, specific to Angélica, but bearing in mind, Angélica, that you can react from what Nandita said, and the same for Nandita to Angélica.
Sure, will do.
Now, the question for Angélica is, as someone who has been an avid advocate human rights, you have consciously chosen to be part of productions that do not promote violence or gender discrimination. To what extent can aspiring actresses uphold their choice in an industry that fetishizes the young female body? This is a question. And the second, or you want to stop here and then I can go to the second question?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. If there's scope for an actress to keep reinventing herself to align her work with her beliefs as her career progresses? This is the concrete question for you. You can, the two questions, it's the same.
Okay, well, I will start by the second part of the question. I think there is definitely a scope for reinventing oneself in as much as you can diversify your work. If you are an actor that, you know, has to rely on somebody else generating work for you, then you're very much constrained by the opportunities that are available. If you generate your own work, then you are in a much freer position to choose the direction that you want to take it to. I'm very worried now by the new generations of not just actors or actresses, but of characters, protagonists in films and television series. I myself have not taken part in much television work for the last 20 years, precisely because the tendency has been to go backwards. The tendency has been to sell an image of women that men would like us to have of ourselves. And women, the young generation of Mexican women have bought that image. And that image is completely contrary to my view of feminism. Young girls, young women have assumed a very male attitude towards life. So the idea of liberation now means you have a male behavior. In other words, you are sexually aggressive, you drink heavily, you curse, you know, as though this were a liberating behavior for women. Our ideal situation is not to take over the male gender. It is to open the possibilities of our own gender as women. It is interesting that in English, the two main words to talk about our gender have the word man or male integrated into them. Male,
yes.
female. So young girls in the United States are not using these words anymore. Or woman, you know, not a man, but a woman. So I feel that when I talk about defending women's issues, I don't know what women I'm talking about any longer, because the young women I see around me don't need or don't think they need to be defended against anything, because they have chosen this aggressive behavior that men have instilled in their minds, thinking that this is the proper way to relate to men on a one-to-one basis. And I think that this does not generate equality. Inequality is everywhere. Christine Lagarde, only a couple of years ago, when she was still the head of the International Monetary Fund, established that salary equality, equality of salaries, would not be achieved for the next 80 years throughout the whole 21st century. So, I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I fear that the younger generation of women, at least in my country, not as what work is that needs to be done in order to generate gender equality. And I think this answers both questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate, because you give us views, broader views, and on these issues. But I don't know if you want to react what Nandita said in general.
Well,
yeah.
I just want to
pick up one point.
Yes, I very much celebrate the fact there are many more women working in both film and television industries, but still to this day, the generating content is still very much in the hands of men. 86% of the stories about women are written by men, and men who don't necessarily want to give a feminist interpretation to their characters. When we did 25 years ago, Mirada de Mujer, this very important, groundbreaking soap opera, I was very, very surprised that there was nothing in the text that I felt I needed to correct. Usually I need to correct even the language, the grammar, the conjugation of verbs, let alone the rest of the ideas. This was very much politically correct. And it was very surprising for me to find a man, a male writer, he's not no more, Bernardo Romero Pereira from Colombia, a very feminine, intuitive man. So this was, I think, unusual. I have read many scripts written by women recently that are not feministly inclined. So that is not a guarantee. The fact that a woman writes a script or directs a film does not guarantee that it's going to be, in terms of gender equality, politically correct. So it's very important that we establish the new view of feminism, because, you know, we've been trying to build a structure for our discourse for the last 120 years. And that has to be redefined in terms of the modern or the newer generations. Men have still to do this work. They have not built a structured ideology around the new way of being a male.
Oh, thank you so
Very
much.
true.
Very enlightening. Very enlightening. True what you said. Nandita, can you'd like to react now, or I can put?
Well, I mean, I just want to add a little that it's very true what you said, because even the feminist films that I grew up with, you know, which had strong female characters, very nuanced, those were actually made by male filmmakers, because at that time there were not that many female filmmakers. Now you still see some, but I'm talking about some of the best films were made, you know, in the 60s or 50s and 60s. some in the 80s. They were all made by men. So it's not so simplistic that just because if a female is behind the camera that it's going to be. But I think having said that, we still need that diversity, because for the longest time, even how we want to build the men and the women characters in a film has been controlled by men, that the narratives have been controlled by men. So how I choose to even show my male protagonist is different than maybe if there was a man who was showing that character. So I think, and diversity is not only gender diversity, you know, we have religious diversity, we have caste diversity. In India, we also have caste, which is crazy, but, you know, regional diversity. There is, it is a very monolithic industry in many ways. You know, there is mostly upper caste, mostly of a certain more majoritarian religion, more male. So in any case, our industry is not so diverse. So women, more women coming in, whether they're politically correct or not, will still bring in a different change. It will still churn the industry and create at least different stories. So I would still champion the fact that more women need to come and tell their stories. Whether they're politically correct or not is fine. But we also in India have similar issues of the younger generation that feels that their sense of feminism is different from the older women, and somewhere, maybe I come somewhere in the middle, and there is not enough dialogue between them, unfortunately. Each one has a very sort of different point of view, and I don't want to make a judgment about it, because sometimes the younger lot, they feel that the older feminists tolerated too much. They did not call out things. They did not speak up enough, and they closed more doors. I mean, they didn't open enough doors. Whereas the younger ones are more, the older feminists feel that the younger ones are trying to be too woke. You know, they're trying to position themselves as feminists. It's not as internalized, or they are playing out in the hands of the male gaze, like you mentioned, Ms. Aragon. You know, you talked about the fact that the way they are portrayed, or the way they want to portray themselves, is actually pandering to the male gaze. And sometimes you think you're making a choice, but actually you're not making that choice. It's a notional sense of choice. You're actually so impacted by the narrative that the men have created about how you should look, how you should behave, how you should portray yourself, that definitely there is some truth in that. And I think India and Mexico are not so different from the few films that I have watched, and even from what you said could easily be said about India. So in many ways, you know, and also the television that you said, that 20 years you've not worked. I don't have a television. I don't even watch television. And sometimes if I see a little bit in a hotel, I see that, you know, women are like witches and they're fighting with each other, and they are really over made up, and it's like true. It's not like life at all. And they say that a lot of women like to watch it, but I think there are a lot of men who watch it too. I think it's not just the women who watch it. So it's regressive in many ways. You know, instead of being progressive, it's very regressive. So yeah, the question could be, why do women do that to themselves? But then you have internalized patriarchy so deeply that you don't even realize that, you know, you're part of it.
Yeah, it's a social norms and standards.
Right.
Story for a long time. So thank you, Nandita. Now I raise a question to you. Nandita, scripts that perpetuate gender roles do not only distort representation of women in media, also encourage a culture of toxic masculinity. As a director, how important is it for you to not only portray diverse female experiences, but also unconventional masculinities in cinema? Back to you, Neda. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, in recent past, we have seen some films that are really portraying toxic masculinity. For instance, and not just this one particular film that I'm talking about, but even otherwise, like we have songs. Songs are very intrinsic part of the mainstream Bollywood cinema. And a lot of these, what they call item song, which means it has really nothing to do with the story, but it's just inserted to entertain. And a lot of these songs are about this particular woman who's very sexy and who's sort of right at the center of it. And there are all these men around, and it's a very sort of sexualized song. And often in films, it is shown that, you know, some man or men are chasing this woman and she's saying no, but the no means yes. So it has, I mean, there have been studies where they've seen that just portraying women like this or portraying situations like this has actually created more cases of molestation, because it sort of brings out in the society that, oh, no means yes, that you don't have to respect a woman's no. You know, it is as if she's being shy or coy, or that's her way of saying yes. So there is a lot of that is portrayed. When I direct films, I don't think I consciously, it's not a sociological paper. At the end of the day, you're telling a story. With this, and I'm going to make men like this. I think what we also mean by female gaze is that my life experiences are bound to impact my creative choices. And therefore, whatever I do, whether it's conscious or subconscious, it will have that female gaze. And like we talked earlier, it's not that that's only only women can have. Sometimes, like Manto, like the person that you worked with 20 years ago in your soap opera, you know, these were men also who had that kind of very special gaze that was sensitive to women. So I think when I direct, I don't have to consciously try to balance, I'm going to show men like this and women like this. I think it's my instinct where women would be more layered, they would have more to do. Their presence will not be just to objectify them. They will look in all shapes and sizes, and they don't have to adhere to the notion of beauty, which is so narrowly created, like the European-centric beauty. Like we are all darks, I mean, we are all different shades of browns, but there is an obsession with lighter skin in India. And everyone is trying to sort of, you know, become lighter. And in the media, especially, if you see all the images, whether it's films, whether it's television, magazines, hoardings, advertisements, everywhere you will see light-skinned women. If there is a dark-skinned woman, then there has to be a story about it. You know, even in a television series, if there's a dark-skinned woman, either she has to be very nice or she has to be villainous almost. There's nothing in between. So there is all of that stereotyping. So I think I've also come from a social work background. I've engaged with issues of human rights and social justice, and they are very much part of me. And I see cinema more as a means to an end and not sort of an end in itself. So I think at a very subconscious and instinctive level, my characters, even if the female character comes for a shorter while, is going to be a complete person. And just as, you know, male characters are written. So I think that is going to happen when more of us also tell stories, and when, as an audience, we demand and we care about women characters more.
So thank you very much for your work towards making a film industry inclusive and diverse. This is another question for both of you. While there is no doubt that the media can be an input for social change, with the present gender disparity, misrepresentation, and overt sexualization of women in media, who will change the media itself? Do you think an empowered presence of female artists can be achieved to break this glass ceiling? I don't know who can start. Angélica,
Maybe
probably.
you can. Yes.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, I'd just like to say that our audiences in Mexico have been watching or have been exposed to soap operas and fiction for the last 70 years, so several generations. Initially, the content was very much controlled by the government. I'm talking about the 50s, 60s, 70s. The soap operas had to be aspirational, showing a sort of better way of life. They had to show social mobility to ensure that people felt confident that, you know, in as much as they put an effort into things, they would be rewarded positively, etc. Today, things have changed very much. We are in a very violent state of our society. The army is out on the streets. Our city today is taken over by police. So the content of fiction has very much shifted, and it has become an apology of criminal life. So strong women characters now are the heads of drug cartels, are women who are heavily armed, as I mentioned before, women who have very masculine attitudes, who take shots of straight alcohol. I think this is very dangerous because we are now integrating all this criminality into our norm. And I think that there is very little space for thought in all of this. One of the things that I think is lacking in our media as artistic creators is there is very little schooling, very little formal academic preparation. So young actresses who have a sort of varnish of acting school, which mainly now has to do with appearance and not with developing skills, they don't have the tools to really understand and analyze what is happening. So it's very much an intuitive, a visceral reaction, which is difficult to organize, difficult to understand as a movement or as a social reflection. So I think that we need a group of creators who much better prepared, academically speaking, to be able to really assume the responsibility that we have as leaders of opinion, basically.
Thank you, Angélica. Nandita, it's your turn now. You want to say something? Please,
well,
go
I would
ahead.
say that the pressure on young women actors, female actors, is enormous because there are so many expectations of them looking a certain way. In Indian films, especially mainstream, the role of a woman is to be able to dance well, is to be romance well, and emote, like cry a little bit. It's still, it's changing, but in a very superficial kind of a sense, apart from a few films that are changing the narrative. But largely the role of a woman is to please, so and to play into that notion. So to expect that they are going to change the conversation is going to be difficult because anyway there is so much competition. In some sense, like a city like Bombay, there are so many young women who come from small towns and smaller cities to, it's the city of dreams, and they come here to come into the film industry, and it's not easy at all. It's an expensive city. They don't know how to stay there. They are wasting their money in trying to do things to their faces or to their bodies or going to the gym. Like you said, that the focus is not on really developing the art of acting, but how to look as perfect as they can, and that perfect definition also has been handed out to them. So it's to expect that they will be more empowered and change the narrative, I think is going to be difficult. those who are in power, which means the producers, which means the directors, and which is largely male dominated, and which is dominated by economics. It's not really an art. It's the economics interferes so much with cinema. It's an expensive medium. So they're only looking at the box office and how can we make more money. So in that scenario, for any deeper change to happen, will have to happen from those in power who consciously feel that we want to diversify, or consciously feel that we want to make characters that are sensitive, or this is very regressive and we don't want to do that, or this is misogynistic, or this is toxic. People in power have to make that conscious choice. And recently also, and when we say media, I mean also news and television and cinema, it's all become one. There is hardly any difference between fact and fiction. Even the news has become sort of like fiction, and there are so many alternate truths. It's not even real. And there's music in the background, and and that's also so misogynistic. Sometimes they target women in such vicious ways, and social media has only made it worse. I mean, the kind of attacks that women get, and I've also been subjected to it. It's always so sexist and so misogynistic that I think there's already too much pressure on women to just remain afloat and somehow. So it's a very difficult situation, and we as audiences really have to change this narrative by asking for more sensitive films and supporting such films.
So thank you so much for your wonderful thoughts and insights. It's really very inspiring to hear from you, to your thoughts, your interventions. Personally, I'm very, very, very much have a gratitude for what you are explaining to us and sharing with us. I'd like to ask for the audience, the viewers, if there are some questions. I see that there is some comments, good comments. I don't see questions. And I think we can end this session today. And I would like to express to both your wonderful panelists here, both women, great women, for sparing their time to share with us their wonderful experience. Really, I'm very, very proud to having you with us today. Really, even on behalf of UNESCO and SHS, we have a new leader, our ADG, Gabriela Ramos. She's a Mexican woman, and she also, I will report to her right now how the debate went on, and I think she will be very, very, very grateful in hearing that we had really a very good panelists with us. I don't know if you have just a takeaway message, key message to say. For example, Angélica, you are concerned about the new generation, just to say one key words, and you, Nandita, as well, and we'll end the session. I'm sorry, I'm like this because I love to hear from you.
Well, I'd just like to say that it is through our example, I think, that we can best make the younger generation of women more sensitive to gender issues. I now have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and this is my target now. These young, very young girls who are now completely unaware of gender differences at that age, and who feel that the world is there for them to conquer. It's interesting that a group of theater directors, Kristen Linklater and Tina Packer from England and Scotland, who opened in the East Coast of the United States, a Shakespearean training center for American actors, established that by playing the male roles, young girls during puberty could overcome their bodily changes, their psychological changes much better because of being exposed to a masculine behavior. So it's interesting that as young girls, we feel that anything is possible. We have the means, we have the energy, and we have the strength and the ability to solve any problem. With adolescence, we become much more introverted. So I think theater, I think that the stage are a great place to rehearse the kind of character that you want to become in real life in the future. So I am very much now aware of the very young children, boys and girls, to try to erase gender differences in their minds and behaviors from that very young age.
Thank you, Angélica. Thank you. Nandita, please.
Yeah, I think I'm also very hopeful of the younger generation. My son is 10, and when I talk to him about these gender differences, he looks at me like, what are you even talking about? Like, they're not even exposed to that world, you know, he doesn't even, and he finds it really foolish that we actually even think like this. Like I was telling someone this morning in another webinar that when I tell him that, yes, it is crazy that, you know, at that time it happened like years ago, but imagine even today it happens. And he says, what do you mean that time it happened? It's not okay even at that time. Why are you only talking about today? So, you know, this is the generation that is questioning the very foundation about how did we even reach here? How did we even reach so much inequality? Why did we even accept it? To the younger people, I would also say that, you know, media, because we are talking about media largely, it's a very powerful means of communication, whether it's television, whether it's cinema, you know, whether it's the internet or whatever. Media is a very strong, powerful means of communication. How do we use it to make the world a better place? Because it's a neutral thing. It's finally a neutral medium. And you can do the best things with it, or you can be very destructive and, you know, can normalize violence, can throw up, you know, regressive stuff. You can do a lot of harm too. So I think it's really important that we don't have to make films messagey, or they don't have to be a big lecture. In fact, they shouldn't be high-handed and preachy. But I think if our work has a social conscience, something that we feel is going to make the world a better place, whether it's a love story, whether it's a comedy, whether it's a thriller, it's possible to have that at the heart of it. And, you know, hopefully, if not in our generation, at some point, things will change for the better, and they will be hastened by our work, which is just a drop in the ocean.
Renewal thanks to both of you. I'd like also to thank you. I'd like also to thank our viewers
and everyone.
Thank you. Our viewers also who tuned in and stayed until the very end of this webinar. I wish you good day or good evening or good night. And we hope that you leave this dialogue with the inspiration to step up your commitment towards gender equality. Thank you so much.